Most people believe compound interest works only if you start with something big, a large sum, a strong advantage, a head start that makes the math worth paying attention to. But if that were true, small beginnings would be irrelevant, and patience would never outperform urgency. So here's the real question. Why do the smallest, most ordinary actions end up producing the largest outcomes over time? Leonardo da Vinci understood this long before finance gave it a name. He knew that accumulation, not intensity, is what bends reality. Stroke by stroke, note by note, iteration by iteration, he observed that power rarely announces itself early. Compound interest follows the same rule. It doesn't reward excitement. It rewards alignment with time, and what looks insignificant in the beginning often becomes unstoppable later. That principle became clear to me the first time progress failed to show up where it should have. The actions were consistent, the inputs were correct, yet nothing seemed to move. No visible growth, no feedback, no reward, which exposed a problem most people never question. When results don't appear quickly, the mind assumes nothing is happening. But in compounding systems, delay is not failure. It's a requirement. Once action and visible reward separate, most people quit. And that's where the real divide appears. Because when outcomes lag behind effort, the only question that matters becomes this: what process are you abandoning too early because it feels inactive? Years later, that question resurfaced while I was reading The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. Not because the book promised shortcuts or dramatic transformations, but because it put language to something most people experience without understanding. It explained how small, repeated behaviors compound quietly over time, creating results that feel sudden only in hindsight. One idea in particular locked everything into place for me. Success does not compound because actions are impressive. It compounds because they are consistent and left uninterrupted long enough for time to do its work. When I reduced the book to its essence, what remained was this: outcomes are rarely decided by intensity. They are decided by what you allow to accumulate. That realization wasn't inspiring. It was unsettling. Because once you see how compounding actually works, you can't unsee how often it's interrupted. Leonardo da Vinci would have recognized this pattern instantly because accumulation was central to how he worked. He did not chase finished masterpieces, he chased refinement. His notebooks were not sudden breakthroughs, but thousands of marginal observations layered over time. Anatomy studies informed painting. Engineering sketches informed architecture. Nothing stood alone. Each insight compounded into the next. Vinci understood that progress rarely announces itself in the moment. It reveals itself only after enough layers exist to support momentum. Compound interest behaves the same way. It is not dramatic while it is forming. It is quiet, repetitive, and almost boring. And that is precisely why most people misjudge it. So why does compound interest feel so unsatisfying while it's working? Because the human mind is wired to reward immediacy. We look for movement, feedback, confirmation. When effort does not produce visible progress, discomfort sets in, doubt grows, and impatience disguises itself as logic. If nothing is happening, why continue? But what if the absence of visible results isn't evidence of failure? What if it's evidence that the system is still forming? Most people don't quit compounding because it doesn't work. They quit because it doesn't reassure them fast enough. This is where compounding is misunderstood most deeply. People assume small actions lead to small results, small savings, small habits, small improvements. But compounding doesn't scale actions, it scales time. A single action repeated consistently inside a long enough timeline becomes something else entirely. The question isn't whether the action is impressive. The question is whether it is allowed to repeat without interruption. How many strategies fail not because they were wrong, but because they were never given enough time to mature? Linear thinking expects proportional rewards. Do more, get more, try harder, see faster progress. Compound systems reject that logic entirely. They delay reward, then accelerate it. They punish impatience and reward consistency. This is why compound interest feels counterintuitive. Early effort appears wasted, middle effort appears stagnant, late effort appears miraculous, but nothing miraculous occurred. The system simply crossed a threshold, and once that threshold is crossed, results no longer require persuasion. They become self-reinforcing. Why does this bother people so deeply once they understand it? Because compounding challenges identity. Many people define themselves by visible effort, by struggle, by intensity. Compound interest doesn't validate that identity. It asks for restraint instead of force, continuity instead of excitement. It suggests that progress may be happening even when nothing feels earned yet. And that creates tension. If outcomes are delayed, how do you know you're doing the right thing? If validation doesn't arrive quickly, how do you stay committed? Most people choose certainty over truth, and certainty rarely compounds. This is why compounding separates people silently. Two individuals can start in the same place, make similar decisions, and apply similar effort, yet end up worlds apart years later. One stays aligned with the process. The other interrupts it repeatedly in search of reassurance. Over time, the difference becomes dramatic, but the cause remains invisible. Was it intelligence, opportunity, luck, or was it simply the willingness to let time do its work without interference? Before we go any further, pause for a moment and look at your own behavior honestly. Where have you been expecting compounding to show results too quickly? In your savings, your skills, your habits, your decisions? Most people say they believe in compound interest, yet behave as if progress should always be visible. And that contradiction quietly determines outcomes. So take a second and locate yourself. Are you still aligned with the process, or have you been interrupting it in search of reassurance? If this distinction landed for you, capture it. Leave a comment with one word that reflects what shifted: patience, time, interruption, or trust. Awareness is the first moment compounding becomes deliberate. Leonardo da Vinci understood why this moment of reflection matters. He believed the mind resists forces it cannot immediately measure. That is why he documented relentlessly, sketch after sketch, study after study, not to rush completion, but to stay aligned with processes whose payoff lay far in the future. Vinci treated time as an active collaborator, not a delay to be endured. Compound interest demands the same discipline. It rewards those who remain consistent even when nothing seems to be happening, and it quietly penalizes those who confuse silence with stagnation. So why does compounding feel slow precisely when it is most important to stay consistent? Because early progress is absorbed by foundation. Just as Vinci spent years mastering anatomy before painting his most celebrated works, compound systems spend their early phase building capacity, not visibility. The mistake most people make is assuming visibility equals progress. But what if the absence of visible change is simply the cost of laying groundwork? What if the slow phase is not the weakest part of compounding, but the most critical? This pattern appears everywhere once you know how to look for it. In investing, the early years feel inconsequential. In careers, the first repetitions feel unrewarded. In habits, the initial discipline feels pointless. Nothing breaks, nothing spikes, nothing announces momentum. Yet beneath the surface, something irreversible is forming. Compound interest doesn't grow in straight lines. It grows in curves. And curves only become obvious once they've already bent reality in a new direction. So, what do most people do during this invisible phase? They interfere, they change strategies, they stop and restart. They add intensity where consistency was required. They chase stimulation instead of alignment, and each interruption resets the curve. How many times has compounding failed, not because it stopped working, but because it was never left alone long enough to mature? The tragedy of compound interest is not that it's misunderstood, it's that it's constantly interrupted by impatience disguised as intelligence. Leonardo da Vinci knew that mastery was cumulative, not reactive. He didn't abandon studies because they felt slow. He trusted that layers would eventually converge. Compound interest follows that same law. At some point, quietly, without announcement, the curve turns, progress accelerates, outcomes begin to stack, and those who stayed aligned look lucky to those who didn't. But nothing random occurred. Time simply finished the work that consistency began. So why does compounding become uncomfortable the moment it's understood? Because it removes drama from progress. There is no heroic struggle, no visible acceleration, no applause along the way, and for many people, that creates friction with identity. If effort is not immediately rewarded, how do you measure worth? If patience replaces urgency, where does pride go? Compound interest doesn't validate struggle, it validates alignment, and that distinction quietly destabilizes the stories people tell themselves about hard work and reward. Leonardo da Vinci anticipated this resistance. He observed that the mind prefers motion over continuity, activity over accumulation. He wrote extensively about how people abandon long-term processes in favor of visible exertion because exertion feels like progress. But what if motion is merely noise and continuity is where real power hides? Vinci understood that forces operating over time don't feel productive while they're forming. They feel monotonous, and that monotony filters out everyone who mistakes stimulation for effectiveness. I've seen this pattern enough times to recognize it without needing proof in advance. Long stretches where nothing appears to move. Effort applied consistently, decisions repeated carefully, habits maintained without reward. And then, almost without warning, a quiet separation begins. What once felt static starts to move. What felt slow begins to accelerate. From the outside, it looks sudden. From the inside, it feels overdue. Nothing new was added in that moment. No intensity increased, no strategy changed. Time simply finished the work that consistency had already started. That's the part most people misunderstand. The outcome doesn't arrive because something changed. It arrived because nothing did. Why do observers call these outcomes luck instead of structure? Because compounding hides its work. By the time results are visible, the process is already irreversible. Outsiders only see the end state, not the years of quiet alignment that produced it. And because the cause is invisible, they attribute the outcome to chance. But what if what we call luck is simply patience surviving long enough to be misread? What if the real advantage was never brilliance, but uninterrupted consistency? This is where discomfort intensifies. Compounding isn't fair. It doesn't reward equal effort equally. It rewards continuity disproportionately. Two people can apply similar discipline for years and still diverge dramatically if one interrupts the process and the other doesn't. And that feels unjust. But compound interest isn't moral. It's mechanical. Time doesn't negotiate. It multiplies whatever it's given. Consistency compounds. Interruption compounds too, just in the opposite direction. So where are you positioned right now relative to compounding? Are you inside a process that's allowed to run uninterrupted, or one that's constantly being reset? Are your actions designed to accumulate quietly or to produce reassurance quickly? Most people never ask these questions because the answers feel inconvenient. Once you see that compounding punishes interference more than it rewards intensity, excuses lose their power. From that point forward, outcomes stop feeling mysterious. Before we move on, pause again. Be honest with yourself. Where have you been breaking compounding in your own life by switching strategies, abandoning habits, or demanding proof too early? That single pattern explains more outcomes than talent ever will. If this question clarified something uncomfortable, capture it. Leave a comment with one word that reflects your current position: aligned, impatient, consistent, or interrupted. Compounding only becomes powerful once awareness replaces autopilot. If this way of thinking resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe, not for shortcuts, not for motivation, but to stay aligned with principles that actually compound over time. This channel is for people who are done mistaking movement for progress and intensity for effectiveness. Here, we study how wealth, decisions, and outcomes really behave beneath the surface. Because when you understand forces like compounding clearly, you stop chasing reassurance and start designing continuity. And that shift changes how every decision feels going forward. Leonardo da Vinci would have seen compound interest not as a financial trick, but as a universal law. He believed that true principles repeat across domains. What works in mechanics works in anatomy. What works in nature works in design. Compounding appeared everywhere he looked. Muscles strengthened through repetition, knowledge deepened through accumulation, invention emerged through iteration. Vinci understood that nothing meaningful arrives fully formed, it arrives layered, and the same force that governs learning and mastery governs money as well. Why would wealth be the one domain exempt from how reality actually works? Once you recognize compounding, it becomes impossible to unsee. Skills compound, reputation compounds, trust compounds, neglect compounds too. The question is never whether compounding is active. It's always active. The question is what it's multiplying. Are your daily actions feeding a curve that bends upward or one that erodes quietly over time? Most people focus on outcomes because they're visible, but compounding operates at the level of inputs, long before results announce themselves. So why do people consistently underestimate the power of time? Because time feels passive. It doesn't demand attention, it doesn't create urgency, and that makes it easy to ignore. But in compound systems, time is not neutral, it's directional. Left uninterrupted, it amplifies whatever structure it's given. This is why small advantages grow massive and small mistakes become expensive, and it's why early decisions matter far more than late corrections. How many outcomes feel sudden only because the early phase went unnoticed? Compounding demands a specific kind of commitment, one that doesn't feel heroic. It requires doing the right thing without immediate feedback, repeating the same action without applause, staying aligned while nothing seems to be happening. Vinci trusted this process deeply. He didn't rush conclusions. He allowed observations to mature. And over time, those layers converged into mastery. Compound interest asks for the same discipline, not intensity, not sacrifice, but consistency placed deliberately inside time. This is where compounding stops being optional. Once you understand that time multiplies whatever it's given, neutrality disappears. Doing nothing becomes a decision. Inconsistency becomes a structure, and impatience becomes a cost. The question is no longer whether compounding will shape your outcomes. It already is. The only remaining question is whether it's working for you or quietly against you. This is where compounding quietly separates people without confrontation. No announcements, no warnings, just divergence. Two individuals can make similar choices, earn similar incomes, and apply similar effort, yet arrive at dramatically different outcomes years later. What changed? Not intelligence, not discipline, simply continuity. One allowed time to work uninterrupted, the other kept intervening. And because the separation happens gradually, it's rarely noticed until it becomes irreversible. How often do people misread distance as sudden when it was actually built slowly, day by day? Leonardo da Vinci lived most of his life misunderstood by those who judged progress by speed. Many of his works were unfinished, not because of failure, but because he refused to rush accumulation. His notebooks reveal a man unconcerned with immediate validation. Vinci trusted that layered understanding would outlive applause. Compound interest works the same way. Recognition arrives late, not early, and by the time it does, the work is already done. So why do people abandon compounding paths so easily? Because switching feels like control, starting over feels active, waiting feels passive, but compounding punishes novelty and rewards continuity. Each restart resets time, each change delays momentum, and each interruption is justified as adjustment rather than impatience. How many lives stall not from bad decisions, but from too many new beginnings? Inconsistent effort doesn't just slow compounding, it reverses it. Habits decay, skills atrophy, capital loses momentum, and because decline is gradual, it feels harmless. But time doesn't pause while decisions drift. It compounds whatever pattern exists. Progress compounds, neglect compounds too, and the cost of inconsistency is almost never felt immediately. It's paid later, when recovery becomes expensive. This is the moment where understanding turns uncomfortable. Once you see how compounding actually works, hope loses relevance. Wishing doesn't compound, timing does. Responsibility replaces optimism, structure replaces motivation, and the question shifts from "will this work?" to "will I stay aligned long enough for it to matter?" Most people would rather believe outcomes are unpredictable than accept how much continuity really controls. Da Vinci believed inevitability was created, not discovered. When systems were arranged correctly, outcomes followed naturally. Compound interest is one of those systems. It doesn't require belief. It doesn't need confidence. It only requires time and consistency. Once those are present, results follow with mechanical certainty. Not immediately, but eventually. And eventually is enough. At this point, compounding stops being an idea and becomes a mirror. It reflects how you treat time, patience, and delayed reward. It exposes whether your decisions are designed to accumulate or to soothe. And it raises a final, uncomfortable question. If outcomes are the result of what was allowed to repeat, what exactly have you been repeating without noticing? This is the moment where compounding stops being interesting and starts being demanding. Once you understand how it works, ignorance is no longer available as an excuse. Time is no longer neutral, repetition is no longer harmless, and delay is no longer passive. If outcomes are shaped by what repeats quietly, then what you allow to repeat begins to matter more than what you intend. The question becomes uncomfortable, but unavoidable. What patterns are you currently feeding simply because they feel familiar? Vinci believed discipline was not force, but restraint. He understood that mastery came from staying aligned with a process long after novelty wore off. Vinci did not chase inspiration. He designed conditions that allowed insight to accumulate. Compounding requires the same discipline, not the discipline to act harder, but the discipline to not interfere. How often does impatience disguise itself as decisiveness, interrupting a process that only needed time? Modern life trains urgency as a virtue. Faster feels smarter, immediate feels efficient, waiting feels irresponsible, but compounding operates on a different clock. It ignores urgency and rewards continuity. The danger is subtle. When everything demands immediate feedback, patience starts to feel like hesitation. But what if the real risk isn't waiting too long, but never waiting long enough for anything to mature? This is why compounding creates such asymmetric outcomes. Those aligned with it appear inactive early and unstoppable later. Those who chase visibility appear productive early and stalled later. The roles reverse quietly, and by the time the difference is obvious, the opportunity to switch has already passed. Compounding does not punish ignorance immediately. It punishes interruption eventually. Da Vinci understood that once forces are arranged correctly, outcomes no longer require persuasion. Gravity does not argue. Time does not negotiate. Compounding belongs to this category of forces. It does not care about confidence, mood, or belief. It multiplies whatever structure exists. When consistency is present, growth follows. When inconsistency dominates, decay accelerates. The system is indifferent, and that indifference is what makes it powerful. Looking back, the moments that mattered most never felt decisive at the time. They felt repetitive, ordinary, easy to abandon, and yet those were the moments that shaped everything that followed. The outcomes didn't arrive because effort increased. They arrived because alignment endured. Compounding doesn't reward dramatic turns, it rewards staying. So what actually separates people over time? Not ambition, not intelligence, not even discipline in the way it's usually defined. The real separator is whether someone remains aligned with a process long enough for time to amplify it. Once you see that, the mystery dissolves. The only remaining question is whether you're willing to let something work long after it stops feeling exciting. The quiet law of compounding has always been present. It shaped fortunes long before it was named. It shaped skills, reputations, and legacies before anyone tried to explain it. Nothing new has been revealed here. Only something familiar has been clarified. Compounding was never hidden. It was simply ignored because it asked for patience in a world addicted to speed. So as you move forward, consider this carefully. Not what you plan to do next, but what you are allowing to repeat, because time will multiply it either way. The law is already in motion. The only decision left is whether it works quietly for you or quietly against you. Before we close, take a moment to reflect honestly on what shifted for you while listening. The most dangerous part of compounding is not learning how it works. It's realizing how long it was already working, quietly, patiently, while being interrupted or ignored. Once you understand that outcomes obey time more than intensity, staying in the same place stops being accidental. It becomes a choice. Leonardo da Vinci believed awareness was the moment responsibility begins. From that point forward, results are no longer shaped by urgency or hope, but by what is allowed to repeat. When clarity replaces impatience, decisions slow down. And it's in that steadiness that compounding finally reveals its power. So let me ask you one final question. After everything you've heard, where do you see yourself now? Aligned, inconsistent, patient, or interrupted? Drop a comment with one word that captures where this truly landed for you. If this way of thinking resonates, subscribe. This channel exists to explore principles, decisions, and clarity, not hype, not shortcuts. I don't rush tools here. I focus on understanding compounding first. But when it comes to wealth creation, consistency needs structure to survive. There is a simple system I personally use to keep finances clear, deliberate, and uninterrupted. No complexity, no subscriptions, full ownership. One intentional setup designed to support patience over time. If that sounds useful, you can explore it using the link below. And if not, this video stands on its own. Clarity always comes first. This was the quiet law of compounding most people never notice. We explored why small actions grow powerful over time, why impatience breaks the curve, and why compounding has always been the force shaping outcomes beneath the surface. And if you found value today, I highly recommend watching my next video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, feel free to leave your comment below. I appreciate your support. Thank you for being here, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.